Is Linux anti-Semitic? Antisemitism is the act of hostility, prejudice towards, or discrimination against Jews. This sentiment is a form of racism, and a person who actively hates Jews is called an anti-Semite. Now, why are we bringing Jews and anti-Semitism to Linux? What the fuck does being anti-Semitic have to do with free and open source? Linux is not anti-Semitic, even if its developers are in fact Jew haters. That does not make Linux itself anti-Semitic, and which distro in existence actively hates on Jews. I haven't seen any that I would consider to be anti-Semitic, but people want to argue that Linux is woke, politically correct, and now people are trying to argue that Linux is anti-Semitic. I mean, what the fuck has this world come to? Your main concern is an operating system hating on Jews, while the real people committing acts of atrocity, the Jews, never get hated on. If anything, we praise them for their military status, and we give medals to people who kill sand niggas in the Middle East. If you don't like hearing the truth, you know where the door is. Linux is not anti-Semitic, nor are its developers anti-Semitic, and even if there is a Linux distro which has a theme of hating Jews, you cannot say that Linux itself is anti-Semitic. Just like woke, anti-Semitic is another word that has lost its original meaning. Now, it seems like anti-Semitism is a way in which our governments can crack down on things like freedom of speech and freedom of expression. It's not that anti-Semitism is not bad, it's the fact that governments take advantage of some things in order to bring in a raft of new laws which will revoke the freedoms, autonomy, and liberty of the people who are subject to these new laws. So don't give me this bullshit of Linux being anti-Semitic. If anything, they will use anti-Semitism to crack down on Linux, if the government feels the need to make Linux illegal for the citizens. But since Linux is a niche market, meaning very few people use it and occupy it, I don't think they will want to take Linux away from us just yet, but keep going the way we are going, and they will probably call Linux anti-Semitic to bring in a new raft of laws that makes it illegal to switch from Windows or Mac OS over to Linux, or any other free and open source OS for that matter. We really need to stop bringing our identity, gender, culture, politics, and racial views over to Linux. It's not at all appropriate to discuss such things in a world where none of these things actually apply to computers and technology. Saying Linux is anti-Semitic is like saying Linux is a Nazi because the Nazis were using Linux to gash the Jews. Are you fucking crazy? Linux is the vehicle, but it is never the reason something happens, unless you're talking about DDoS attacks, or something like that. So if the Nazis are using Linux to commit acts of atrocities, we don't look at Linux and say Linux is the problem. We look at the people using Linux, and then say, ah, the Nazis are the real issue here, not Linux. Linux is just a goddamn kernel. A kernel on its own is nothing without human intervention. Linux cannot commit a genocide on its own, but people who want to commit genocide can use Linux. Do you get what I am saying? Linux itself is not the issue, it's the people using it. But do you think your government cares about that? Not a single fucking bit. All they care about is maintaining the power dynamics, so that you will always be ruled by the ruling elite, and the ruling elite will never lose their grip on power, influence, and control. If Linux is anti-Semitic, where are all the posters about Linux hating on the Jews? I don't see any. Well, that's because there is no fucking anti-Semitism in Linux. You retarded cunts who think Linux always comes back to politics. Stop shoving your fucking retarded thoughts into Linux. Linux is just a fucking kernel. It's not anti-Semitic, even if its developers are in fact anti-Semitic. Just because a developer is woke, or politically correct, does not mean that their software carries the same opinions or beliefs, and by the same token, even if a developer of a Linux distro is anti-Semitic, the Linux distro itself is not representative of anti-Semitism.